Hello everyone, welcome to Painting Crafty. Are you ready for another autumn painting? This little cute foxy gal has carrying a little apple pie and it says autumn skies and apple pies. I love that little saying, and this little gal is cute as can be. I'm going to be painting it on this masonite board that I bought at my local Dollar General store. Masonite is one of my favorite surfaces to paint on when I'm doing acrylic painting because it's so nice and smooth. I'm also going to be showing you how you can use a tracer to be able to trace her and then paint her. I do have a sketchbook membership that I have all my tracers inside of there, that any of the paintings that I do on my YouTube channel. It's easy to join, very reasonably priced, and I so appreciate all who have joined and support my channel that way. Thank you, thank you. I'm going to be showing you how you can float some color there, use some scruffy brushes to create some texture, and add all these little pretty details using colored pencils. Well, let's get started. I can't wait to show you how you begin the process of creating this little autumn foxy gal. The circle I'm using is 9 inches across, and I gave it a coat of the Plaid's chalk paint in the color Rich Black. To trace my image, I was going to be using the Sorel transfer paper in the white version. I laid the transfer paper down, put my image on the top. I like using a color pencil to go around the large shapes, and then I can see where I've stopped and started easily by using a color pencil. I'm only going over the large shapes. I don't need a lot of the extra detail. I'm going to start out with basically 4 colors to start base coating in those larger areas. Now, if you're in my sketchbook membership, I'll include all of the paint colors so you don't need to write them down as I'm speeding this film going so quickly. I'm going to be painting on black, of course, and that's going to affect the painting process a little bit. Normally, when you're doing acrylic painting, you start with your darker colors and then layer your lighter ones on top. I'm going to kind of do that, but I might actually backtrack just a little bit too, because that black underneath is going to affect how dark my colors dry. So here I'm adding a little bit more of the light color on the top, blending it with my burnt sienna, and I'm going to do that in all of those redder areas. But I'm going to be adding a little extra burst of red in just a few minutes. I almost forgot to do the little ears. It's amazing to me how I'll be painting along and I'm doing all the areas I think I need to be done, and then I often forget one, and I almost forgot to do her little ears. Now this is that bright shade of red I'm going to be adding on. I'm going to be using the Golden's Pyrrole Red. It is a beautiful shade of red. It is one of my favorites to use. This paint is a little bit more professional grade. It's a little bit more expensive, but it's so worth having this paint in your art collection if you like a bright shade of pop of red, and this one did that for me. The other colors were drying okay. They were just drying a lot more matte because they're more of a craft paint, but this Pyrrole Red is going to add that little boost of color. I'm going to be mixing some of those other paints with it, but that really does bump up the quality of that shade of red. Hopefully you can really tell. I'm just mixing up a brown to do her feet and her little hands. This is going to get several layers before I'm done, so this is just the beginning shades of her little hand. This style of painting, of using this dirty brush technique, it really is just kind of building the colors, and with acrylic paint, if you don't like it, you can always cover it up and add another layer. For her tail, I picked up a little bit warmer shade of brown and some of that off-white, and I'm mixing the tail color. This time I'm starting a little lighter on those areas, and then I'm putting the darker shades on the top. And then I will be dancing back and adding a little bit more bright to those areas. Again, it's putting the layers on, seeing how they're drying, and then adding as you go. This isn't a formula like color book painting. If you do this, then this. It has to do with how your painting is drying, how you're applying the paints. Everybody's hand is different. This is just kind of a playing process of adding your paint on and seeing how it dries and how it mixes together. On my channel, you often see me do watercolor, and watercolor always dries lighter. Acrylic paint is just the opposite. It always dries slightly darker. On this stage, I've already done the blue on her jacket and the green on her cuffs and on her collar, and a yellow shade for her dress. Because that black underneath really does affect the colors, I often will mix a little bit of white into each of those colors just to add a little bit more opacity to my colors to make them pop a little bit more. But I started with my darker color there, and then I was applying the lighter color on the top. Now her handkerchief on her head was going to be an orange color, so I needed to put a brighter white underneath there to get a chance of that it might pop a little bit better for the orange. For her cuffs, I had started out with a medium shade of green, but I wanted them to have just a little bit more brightness to them. So I chose a bright color of green and then just layered a little bit over the top. At this stage, I switched to one of my favorite brushes. It's a kid's brush actually, and it's got kind of a scruffy quality to it, but I love the brush strokes that I can get with it, the irregular look. So that's why I switched up to use that little bit of a scruffy brush. Here I'm going in and I'm painting that pocket. I'm just going to be doing it freehand. I wanted to create that black line work first before I blocked in the color. I like having little peaks of that background showing through. You can kind of see some of the black peeking around her jacket, a little bit on the pie, a little bit even on her face. I like having that look of that little bits of that peak of that background color showing through. So I'm going to outline my pocket first with the black, and then I'm going to take my scruffy brush and block in the colors. At this stage in the painting, I'm really using that dirty brush technique where I'm picking up multiple colors of paint. I don't usually rinse off my brush in the water. I just take a paper towel and I just rub my brush on that, so I'm not adding a lot of liquid to my paint, and I'm letting the colors blend as they go. You can kind of see here how that having that white underneath that orange is really going to help this little handkerchief be a little bit more bright of a color. Now I'm starting the layering process of the pie. I could have maybe benefited from putting white underneath there too, but I chose kind of more of a flesh tone color, a light flesh tone color to base coat my pie in, and then I'm going to be layering some additional colors on top of that as well. I let my painting dry just a little bit and then I removed all the extra chalk marks from the transfer paper. This way I can see those little peaks of black better, and I can remove it all the way from the back so I have an idea of what my painting looks like. Because I base coated it in chalk paint, I'll easily be able to go in and add another layer and you won't see any of the brush marks because it's so flat of a paint. At this stage, I'm just checking my colors, seeing how if there's enough contrast, if there's darker colors and a little bit more lighter shades as well. And I'm just checking them as they're drying. I'm going to add a few painted detail marks, so like a little pattern on top of her little pockets, and I'm going to be adding just a few little check marks with some paint as well on her collar and on her cuffs to add a few little bit more painted patterns. I'm going to be adding some floated color shading to add a little extra depth to these areas. So these are more of the flat blended color looks, but I'm going to add a lot more depth by adding some shadows. To add a few more details to my pie area, I chose a navy blue color, and I'm going to be adding a few little stripes, but I go back in with the lighter shades of paint so that I can go over those stripes and make them look a little bit more irregular. My style of painting is I don't necessarily like super exact, so I'm looking for ways to kind of put line work in, but then to soften it a little bit, so I'm applying the colors back over those areas. And here I'm just working a little bit more on those little ears and adding some bright areas, working on those little tufts of fur on her face. Those ones that took me a little bit of time to make sure I still had them in there. I do define them a little bit more when I go in with my pencil work. Now let's work some on those shaded floated colors. This is when I'm going to be using my angle brush. I dip it into water, and then when I take, it's clean water, and then when I take it out, I tap it on my paper towel until I see the shine disappear. Then I just tip the corner of my angle brush into my paint, blend it back and forth on my palette so the paint goes from dark until light, till disappearing. And then I can add my watercolor float by doing it that way. So I'm floating on that dark shade of blue around her jacket, the burnt sienna colors on her dress. And I'm going to be using that burnt sienna colors to float it around her face as well to give a little shadow there. And I'm going to be doing a color float on her tail too. All these little floated shadows really add a lot to this painting. If you need to remove some, you can always just dampen or wipe off your brush a little bit, and then you can lift some of your color if you need to. The pie is going to get a little floated shadow on that as well, just to add a little bit more toasted look to that little pastry. To help me mark my eyes easier, I used some tracing paper that is a clear tracing paper, marked it from my pattern, flipped it over, added a little bit of pencil to the back so it would transfer over, then went over my shapes, and when I lift it up, I can see where my shapes are. That's just a simple way to use your tracers to help create those little detail marks if you need to. For our eyes and her mouth little details and for her little tiny eyelashes, I was going to be using these mini brushes to help me create that look. I'll have a link down inside of my description box for some of the materials that I used today. So if you're interested in checking out these little mini detail brushes, they'll be listed down below. Now let's create her some blush cheeks. I like using a very dry brush, and a nylon brush is what I like to use. The bristles are nice and soft to be able to do this with. I apply some color onto my brush, but then rub it onto my palette, and often I put it on my hand. And if it feels dry when I'm scrubbing it on my hand, then I know it's dry enough to make her cheeks. Here I'm giving her some lashes to be able to add that little character, a few little small eyebrows, and then finishing off her mouth detail. I added buttons to the front of her dress using the colors of browns that I already had on my palette. I'm using that dirty brush technique again and just picking up a variety of shades of brown. The little top of the pie has those little holes that are at the top. I had first painted them in a dark brown, and now I'm just adding a little bit more reddish brown to the top, so it kind of makes a little bit more emphasis where you can see them a little bit better. To create the buttonholes, I used my stylist and I tapped in 4 little areas on each button. I was going to be adding the thread lines after that dried. I decided that her scarf also needed some floated watercolor details. I picked up more of a rusty brown and added that floated shadow around her scarf line. I also wanted to add a little bit of dry brushing, but this time I wanted to use that soft white color. I applied it the same way I do with my cheeks, but I just switched up the color. I'm adding some highlights to her arm, on the top of the pie, a little bit on her forehead, and some on her tail too. I don't want to go overboard with this look, but I like having that little bit of a blushed highlight of the white as well. To add the polka dot detailing on her scarf, I used the end of my paintbrush. The smaller little dots down below on her scarf, I used my stylist. I was able to reshape my circles as well using my stylist. It's a great tool to have. For her dress, I added little patterns of 3 dots clustered together. To put the lettering on, I used the same tracing paper method that I had used to add the details to her face. Because I wanted to have the majority of my painting to have most of the black background, I needed to add some detailing around the edge to kind of add some interest all the way around. And I love painting vine work. It's one of my favorite things to do. Vines are easily created with the pressure that you put on your brush. Always add some water to your brush, twirl it in your paint, and then pull it towards you so you get a nice little point. And then when you're applying your paint, it all has to do with the amount of pressure. You can always practice off to the side to see how it works for you and how to load your brush that makes those nice thin lines. But vine work is so fun to practice and to be able to do. You can add it to so many of your paintings. Now that my painting is all the way dry, it's time to add some scribbly bits. And if you watched me, you know I love this step of adding all the additional line work. This is always optional. If you're not a scribbly bit gal and you like the look of just paint, do that. But I love this little adding the depth using color pencils, chalk pastels, whatever I might have. But today I'm using some color pencils. The set I'm using today is the Prismacolor Premier line. As with everything, color pencils come in a variety of quality as well. The Premier line has a stronger pigment. You can also use the Scholar line, which is more of a student one, and they are equally as good, but the ones that are Premier have more of a pigmentation inside of there. I just bought mine at Walmart. When doing the line work, I'm just picking up colors that might add a little bit more interest to my painting. I'm using irregular lines, pushing and twisting my pencils to create some interesting line work. I even used a little bit of the white to add some brightness to her face, added a little bit of scribbly bits around the circles. It just added more interest to those polka dots. I also used it to add the steam lines that were coming up from the pie. I had painted my lettering using a white Posca pen, but I felt it was a little too stark. So now I'm going back in with my color pencils and adding a little bit of the color. I'm using the same blues for my painting, a little bit more of that aqua color as well, just to add some interest to the lettering. The next pencil I'm showing you I'm using is my Kimberly 9XXB pencil. This is my favorite way to almost add those charcoal quality of pencil mark lines. It has a rich black quality, it's a nice soft pencil. You can sharpen it to a point or use it a little bit more bluntly. I often use this in my mixed media pencil work, and I love the quality of lines that I can create. I'm taking a little bit more time and showing you how I'm using this pencil because I really do think it adds such a beautiful quality to my mixed media pieces. I wanted to add a layer of coffee stain over the top, so I gave my piece a coat of the workable fixative first so it wouldn't move any of my pencil work around. Then once my coffee stain had dried, I covered my piece with the Rust-Oleum's matte clear finish. Well, let's see what she looks like sitting in my studio with some of the other fall collection items I have created so far on my YouTube channel. This little gal is going to be available as a standalone pattern on my Ko-fi shop. You'll have to check it out if you want to go ahead and paint her yourself. And if you'd like to become a sketchbook member, I'd love to have more creative friends join me. If you enjoyed this tutorial, here's another one you might want to check out. Leave me a comment, give me a thumbs up. It really can help my channel grow. Well, thank you for joining me today, and hopefully you'll come back and join me again, and perhaps next time you'll paint right along with me.